Hi, everyone. Hey, John.
Hey, Amanda.
Hi,
Hey, Jay.
AJ.
Hi, good morning.
Where are you?
Um,
Where are you this morning, AJ?
I'm in Huntington Beach.
Huntington Beach.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
we're going to give everyone just a few minutes to jump on. We have quite a few registrants today. So we're going to give everyone just a couple minutes to jump on. But in the interim, I want to go ahead and start with a couple introductions here. We have AJ. AJ is with YA Group. He's a scheduler based out of the Las Vegas office, and he has firsthand experience with pool planning. AJ, do you want to give us a little background?
Yeah, so I had a project with a client, a data center project. And we did go through a pool planning process, a couple actually. I know we'll discuss kind of the different approaches to pool planning throughout this webinar, but just to give you a general rundown of what I kind of went through was we used the sticky note method initially for our pool plan meeting. That seemed to have went well. And then we also did the process where we went through a pool plan session through P6, and kind of saw how the full planning kind of happened live within our schedule. So I know that'll be discussed more throughout this webinar. So we'll probably get into more of that later.
And AJ is being very modest here. AJ works on a multitude of projects from data centers, high rises, multifamily. He's done some roadway as well. So he has quite a bit of experience under his belt here.
Good to have you, AJ.
Thanks for having me.
Well,
And
let's go
John,
ahead.
you're in Dallas today, correct?
I am. I am. Let's go ahead and get started. You want to just
Sure. Just
welcome
let's go over
everybody?
a few things before we get started. Since there is quite a few of you in the webinar today, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box, and I'll either answer them as we go along, or any of the panelists will answer them as we go along. And if we don't get to them in the session, we'll try to get to them at the end. And if you haven't already connected with us on LinkedIn, please join us on LinkedIn and reach out to any of us if you have any questions. In regard to scheduling, pool planning, or delay analysis. So let's go ahead and get started with pool planning and construction scheduling today.
Well, good. Yes, but you know what? Before we get started, just want to remind our attendees today about our conference in May of next year. This is going to be 2 full days and plus another half day of very, very good live training with some of the best schedulers in the industry. We have a great faculty that we're lining up that's going to be teaching topics just like we're covering today, and it's going to be a great, great conference. So you need to put that on your calendar. That's May 11 through 13. You can go to PMCOS.org, and I don't know if you can actually register yet, but in the next week or two, you should be able to actually register. And yeah, but put that on your calendar, May 11 through 13 in Lake Las Vegas. It's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of good networking, and a lot of good learning together. Right quick, want to remind everybody about our scheduling course. We currently have the scheduling course and the certificate that goes along with that. It's through Clemson University right now. It's our first university that's actually hosting that, but you can go to our website. There's a link there that'll take you directly to the scheduling course. We'll have our first graduating class at our conference next year. We're going to be passing out those certificates, and if you finish it ahead of time, we can actually send it to you if you can't make it to the conference. But we're very excited about that. One more announcement in a couple of weeks. On the 4th, we have an upcoming webinar. This is going to be on a Tuesday, so this is not part of our regular series, but we're highlighting one of our sponsors, but also just an excellent tool, SSI Tools. This is Kenny Arnold, and even if you're not a Microsoft Project user, but certainly if you're a Microsoft Project user, you definitely want to attend this. In fact, there are a lot of things that Kenny's going to be able to show you that you can do in Microsoft Project that you may want to export your P6 file and put it in there to do some of the stuff. That's going to be amazing. Good learning experience on the force. So you can actually register for that as well on the website. So look forward to that time with Kenny. Keep that on your calendar. That's the 4th. So what we're going to cover today, why pool planning is important. I'm going to give you a little bit of history, some of the lessons learned. We have a lot of experience here today, a lot of pool planning for many years, and some lessons learned. We'll get into how to conduct a session, some things to watch out for, things to avoid, and some tips and tricks, as well as getting those pool plans integrated into your critical path schedule. Now, I'm a history person. Anybody that knows me knows how much I like history because it gives us context for things. And so, to understand a little bit about pool planning, the idea originally kind of started back in the 40s and 50s. Toyota, they developed what we now call just-in-time planning, right? And it's basically looking at, getting all your procurement items, all the assembly line process set up to where things arrive just in time in order to meet, something coming off the assembly line. And then through the 80s, they developed it further into what's called the Toyota production system. And then in the early 90s, a couple of engineers, Glenn Ballard and Greg Howell, actually formalized the process a little bit, what we call the Lean Institute. In fact, these two guys eventually set that up. They were very, very important pioneers in what we're talking about today. In fact, I think Ballard wrote his master's thesis on it. In fact, that was in the late 1990s was the first pool planning stuff. And what's important about this, I look at this time period when all this developed. I was scheduling back then. In fact, I was scheduling a long time before this came up. But in the early, but certainly in the 80s and for the most part of the 90s, as a scheduler, I would be, somewhere in the back room in a trailer with the drawings and trying to put a schedule together with very little participation from the project team, and certainly not much participation from the guys that were actually going to be out in the field, putting the fasteners on or actually doing the work, right? And so there was a big gap in the scheduling process back then where, in my case, I was the scheduler and no one really participated with me, or it was rare that they did. This system, the pool planning system, was the complete opposite, right? It was on the other end of the spectrum where it's like this process took the people, what we call the last planners, the people that are actually out in the field installing it. That's what the last planner means. And actually pulling a plan from that. And so that was late 1999 or 98, 99. I probably heard about it the first time during the early 2000s. It started gaining some traction. And I remember, my first contractor that was talking about implementing a pool planning session in the early 90s. And, it was quite a learning experience sitting and watching people go through that. But it's progressed over the years. From those early days to, I would say, 15 years ago, there really became, a much more significant push in driving this into the market. And by 10 years ago, there was, fairly wide integration in most construction projects. In fact, I remember, and the process, that's what we're going to cover today. The process, particularly in the last 10 years, has really, really become fine-tuned because now, the impact that's had is, now we have systems and processes in place where it's like a part of the whole scheduling process. So it's integrated with the CPM, integrated with the critical path process. So that's what we're going to be covering today, how to do it. So it's been fun to watch it. From my perspective, I came from the other end where I was the critical path method schedule developer with very limited integration from the field to, watching the pull planning. Everyone gets involved in the planning and then seeing that transform really how we do our critical path. And then, of course, in the last 10 years, there's also been just a lot of development in the technology, the actual software, right? That'll help you work through this process. So I wanted to go just kind of take just a few minutes. I know we talked a little bit about it with AJ, but I thought we would have an opportunity here to let our panelists kind of give your pull planning story, how you got involved in it, and some of the, just tell your little pull planning story. Amanda, why don't we start with you?
Okay. Well, I've been involved in several pool planning sessions. I think the first one I was involved in was a federal courthouse in Des Moines, Iowa, where they were planning for the 100-year flood. That one, I can say I took away a lot of lessons learned on what not to do. So we can get into that a little bit later. And I had a project with Janie, numerous projects with Janie. Janie Winnings on the line here as well. She's one of our panelists, where we pool planned a 2-year project that ended up taking us into 9 years. And we integrated multiple pool planning sessions to mitigate and draw things back. And then on the data centers with AJ as well. I've also done solar plants. So I've been involved in a multitude of different pool planning sessions on different types of projects.
Yeah, Janie, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to
Can you
have
hear me?
I can hear you. Hey, by the way, let me introduce you real
Okay.
quick.
Thanks.
That Janie Winning is on the board for the college, and we're glad to have her with us. She is one of the definitely an expert in construction, planning, scheduling, just good managing projects. We've had an opportunity to work across the table, actually, quite a few times, and she's really good, not only at working through these kind of processes, but just really helping projects, facilitate projects. So glad to have you today, Janie.
Thank you, John. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
So go ahead, your pool planning story.
So my pool planning story it goes way back into the 1990s. But I didn't know I was pool planning. I was just conducting a process where we were trying to figure out the most effective way for the depot maintenance of military aircraft. And I got all this plotter paper and all these stickies, and I did it later, unbeknownst to me, I did it just like I was doing a poll plan. We just did not call it that back then. We just called it coordination or something. I don't even know what we called it. Maybe it was just get in here and do this. So in the early 2000s, then I worked, and from 2000s to 2016, I worked for Turner Construction, who adopted the whole lean processes early on in the 2000s. And that's where I learned about pole planning. That's when I learned a lot of the pros and a lot of the cons. A lot of the superintendents at that time were very resistant, and kind of learning how to engage them without hurting their egos way back then. So that was quite a process we went through. And eventually we went and we would have pull plans with 4D scheduling. And then we ended up doing predictive analysis. So we came a long way. And then I met Amanda in 2017 and worked with her on one of her projects for another 8 years. And as she mentioned, we did a lot of pool planning and on that particular project, And what we found beneficial is just even just mini pull plans, like they would get a change order and let's just do a pull plan just specific for that. And then let's integrate it into the schedule. And that required a whole kind of process that we kind of got used to, but it was quite effective in keeping the project from being longer than it actually was. So
Well, good. AJ, we talked about yours a little bit. You can give
Yeah.
a little quick response on your
Yeah.
history.
We briefly went over it earlier. Been a part of a few poll plannings, but kind of refer to that data center one because it's to me the most recent and to be honest, what I've learned from the most with these poll planning sessions. Like I mentioned earlier, we went through the sticky note process, and we saw that to be pretty effective. We integrated into the schedule and kind of went through that process, see how the changes were made, and then later down the road, the project team kind of wanted to go through a poll planning session through solely P6 and just see exactly how everything was affecting the schedule if we kind of met some of the timelines and such. So two different approaches. I know we'll probably discuss, like I said earlier, more of those approaches, but yeah, that data center one was definitely the most I've learned from, and um, yeah.
Well, good. Well, thank you. What are some of the I mean, what are some of the benefits that you see from poll planning? Just let's be real quick on this. What are some of the benefits that you see, and maybe even some of the lessons that you've learned?
Definitely improve collaboration. The pool planning shifts it just from the scheduling from the top down, but it brings the field up and it's field up driven. The crews coordinate their dependencies directly and it creates ownership as well.
I think you
Right.
can see from the picture on in front of us that it brings visibility to the trade partners on who is where at what time and when they're all working in the same week, maybe in the same area or close to the same area. And it allows for they may not have realized that before because, every trade is focused on their deliverable, making money for their company. And all of a sudden they get to the project and someone else is in their way. And if you have these sessions, you alleviate a lot of that.
Right.
Yeah, I would say it a little more so cutting out the middleman as part of kind of relaying information between the trades and the super and kind of relaying that to the scheduler is definitely beneficial to get all those trades and meeting those timelines.
Yeah,
Right.
just FYI for if you are relatively new to pool planning, that image I forgot to say that, but the image there, that's what we're calling the sticky note method. You've got different sticky notes, and typically you're setting up a color code, right? So you'll give electrician blue, you'll give your mechanical pink, whatever, right? So these are all the different trades as they were talking about, and this is just a one example of how you do it. You set, you can use certain ones for milestones, whatever. But typically you use a color coded, you're actually looking at putting some, man hours, you think. And the idea, one of the things that I really like about pole planning is just the level of detail that you have. I can take an activity for form rebar and pour a slab, right? And a pole planning session will actually break that down to where your carpenters, uh, you know, put in there exactly how many man hours, and they say, hey, we should finish the farm by this time tomorrow or on Tuesday. Our rebar guys should be ready to come over there by noon, and they should be done, really, really detailed by how many, what their budgets are, and how much material they're going to put in place, as well as any utilities that are going in there. You plug those in when they're going to need to be in there doing stub ups or whatever. And then obviously your concrete, you have your inspections, you break it out into detail, and then obviously your concrete pour. So you could take for me as a scheduler, it's a 1 week task to form rebar and pour a slab. But from a pool planning session, I can really get into detail and find out exactly, we can do that in 4 days, or it's actually going to take us 6 when we really get into that level of detail. So that's really, that's one of the biggest benefits. One of the biggest benefits that I have seen. Any other thoughts on that?
No, like you were saying, it enhances the reliability of the schedule as well. You get realistic commitments from everyone too, and then they can see how they interact and how the dependency on each other. So the
Right.
transparency is amazing.
Yeah, yeah. I mentioned the slab, just breaking out a concrete pour. What are some other good examples of areas you'd want to do that?
The underground geothermal is quite the process. In kind of, if they haven't ever done it, doing this process helps them understand the process and what goes one before the other and what works and what doesn't. Um, if you're bringing, one thing I always caution, when we're doing it to greater detail is these guys are coming in from the field and the best thing to do is to help be prepared as you possibly can be because they probably haven't looked at it much because they're doing their jobs from day to day. So when they come in and they're going for, even if the work is that you're looking at is a couple weeks ahead, they were focused on the work in front of them. So you coming prepared, you coming knowing what is all involved, and you coming in with an understanding will help them help lay out all of this because they might not have their hours and their budget all in front of them or all coordinated. Um, and you don't want to keep them indoors for a very long period at a time where they won't show up at the next one. So,
Right. For sure. Yeah.
Right.
so,
Couple hour
you
segment.
being prepared really helps.
Well, let me give you some idea. Here are some of the most effective pull plans that I've seen. Right, I mentioned like taking a concrete pour activity, just a simple task, and breaking that out. Sometimes it's, I've seen it work very well where it's like, on a high rise, we're gonna be moving up through this building 1 floor a week, for example. And from the time you're gonna pour the concrete deck through the trades coming through there, with inspections and everything, and really detailing out one clean sequence of a floor, right? That's another example where you could really do that and say, how are we going to turn 1 floor a week with these trades? How many people is it going to take? What kind of level of manpower is it going to take? Whatever. That's a good one.
May I add to that high
Sure.
rise thing? So in the LinkedIn building in San Francisco, we had we were doing this process, and then they changed the way they were going to build the whole building. So they put the structure up, and then they worked from the after doing this process, they found themselves running into each other if they were going up. So they did the whole structure and built the insides out from the
From the
top down. And so everything was coming down. So by the end, everything was just, flowing out the bottom of the building and that, but they weren't running into each other's way and ruining work that was already in place.
Right.
So it really paid off on that building.
Right.
We have a question I think would be appropriate to answer right now. How does pool planning apply to pre-con activities, including design? How do you use pool planning for these activities, which tend to be a lot more nonlinear in my experience? So that's a great question right there. So I can kind of lead into this and if anyone else wants to join in. But when it comes to pre-con, that's really great because you need to know not only do you have you have your SDs, your 60s, 80s, 90s, all the way up to your CDs, getting all of your construction documents approved, going in for your permitting, and then seeing what the procurement is as well, leading up to the actual construction. So doing pool planning strategies for that definitely helps out a lot. We did that in our federal courthouse building as well. We had to have a lot of input. We had judges input. We had tons of different designers input. So having those pool planning strategies during the design and procurement phases is definitely very helpful. I actually have let me see if I can share my screen here. Let's see, how do I?
While she's sharing her screen, it's really helpful in the design phase on design build and progressive design build because procurement and construction overlap in a huge way. And
Right.
so like if you take and you know when you're going to be installing the exterior and say that's coming from Thailand and it costs and takes a whole year and then the whole process to do the mock-up and testing and all that, you build your way back and then you kind of know when you have to have your edge of deck calcs. And a lot of times that's earlier than later than the structural engineers want. They'll do all their calcs, but they'll leave the edge of deck calcs to
Right.
later. So it is really important and it can be done.
Yeah, keep in mind that the idea behind pull planning is you start with a milestone and work your way back. So particularly in pre-con, in a lot of cases, you'll have a certain design that you have to get approved, by, just recently on a project where had to be approved by a community council, one of the local councils, and they only meet once a month, right? So if you don't hit that date, if you're not ready for that date, it's going to go out a month, right? So taking a date like that, where you're getting approval from county commissioner or whoever, and working your way back to make sure that you hit that date that's a good example in the pre-con. Yeah, I've got other examples that I've used it for. If you're in heavy civil, right? And you have, if you're wanting to work through, you're going to have a lot of traffic. So, for example, was working on a project that had a very intense sequence that had to be planned out through a bunch of intersections. That was a very high traffic intersections, and they had to make sure they were building a section, doing the traffic switches and everything moving through that intersection. Those are good startup and commissioning. If you're in a startup and commissioning, getting everybody in the room that's going to be participating in all of the testing and startup and commissioning, those are a big ones. I've used it for doing, we have a delay on a project. I think we mentioned that earlier. You have a delay on a project and you really want to look at exactly, not only what the impact of the delay is, but maybe there's a sequence. For example, let's say you're doing a bunch of footings and you're getting the footings done to erect the steel, but you have a delay in one footing or one area of the building. And so you can pull plan out and really break out the level of detail to see how much time or how much of this delay can we minimize by sequencing the steel erection, things like that. And then, I've got clients that do it on a weekly basis. They'll just here's our work for the next week. And every week they have a pull planning session and they take every activity that's going to be worked on the following week and really sit down, make sure they have all of the procurement items set up, make sure all the delivery, all the crews are coordinated and everything to make sure they're doing it. And obviously, you plan that well, your project's going to be a lot more successful.
Amanda, did you have a list that looked really cool on the screen, but it went away?
I probably did.
There you go. Yeah.
Can you see it? I'm not sure what screen is being shown. I've never had to do
It
this.
says objectives for pull planning, detailed plan,
Perfect.
constraints.
This is just one of them. When we're talking about the pool planning, the procurement, the permit phase, we take smaller sections, and this is the smaller section that I was talking about. You can go in and you can detail what your objectives are for the pool planning session throughout the full day, and then you start breaking it down into very small segmented areas. As you can see here, we went through procurement and permits and any delays and conflicts. And we talked about the constraints before we even got into the actual pull plan, putting the sticky notes on the board, getting everybody integrated into that process. And this is kind of like what one of the sticky notes would look like. Your preconditions right here, you can see that any of the preconditions before we get to our site acquisition, and then what are the satisfactory conditions. So we would pull this section of work, make sure that we have anything that needs to be completed prior to before we start it, and then what happens afterwards. And I can give you an Excel sheet that we actually use during the conceptual.
Yeah, now this was for, I think this was these were worksheets that we put together prior to the actual sessions themselves. And so we passed these out to and
It was
these,
to all the
yeah.
trade partners that were in the room. And then each one of these, like if it was yellow, it coordinated to their sticky note. So we would know how to take that information and put it back into the schedule, like AJ was talking about. But having this set up before you even go into a meeting is fantastic. And each one of the cards will look something like this. This is what we utilize to put the information back into the schedule. But say that it was your masonry, they would have the blue sticky note. Any of their activities would be written down on here. We would write the durations down. We would do our preconditions and the satisfactory conditions, and then any of the effort required in that. So this is just all the front end work that goes into the pool planning session that makes the job easier once we get there.
And I think Tom had a question on, as a principal from a design firm, and that could probably be a whole webinar. But one, having your alignment session on like what's in your CDs, what are in your 50% DDs, what packages are in those, and then where do those packages overlap? And then you will probably pull each of those packages and know what's going to be done on what week. I think you probably have a goal of when your concept drawings are due and when your review board is going to be. So those would be the milestones you would pull from, but knowing what's in that package you're delivering, because I could say 50% drawings and you could say 50% drawings and we might not mean the same thing. So getting aligned on that, and what packages are inside each of those deliverables is very helpful. And then you might pull them individually from there.
Right. Well, let's go through some tips that I've just put this list together to kind of help walk through the process. These are some of the things that I like to go to. First thing you want to do is define your scope. In other words, I remember early on where we would try to pull plan an entire project, right? And it was a disaster, right? And that's too much to try to do, not only in a 1 day, 2 day session, but there's too many things out in the future that are too unknown, right? So if you're going to do an entire project, you can, but it's going to be a more macro approach. I found the most effective pool planning is where you really define a specific scope. So I'll actually take a group of activities, for example, a group of, let's say I'm doing some underground with some vaults and things like that, that are going to require multiple concrete pours, things like that, but just really define a good, clean, succinct scope of work that's going to need a pool planning. And I'll usually use my schedule to define that scope. In other words, I'm going to take a few activities in my schedule and do those pool cards like Amanda was showing, where I'll say, hey, here are the activities in the schedule, and I'll give those pool cards to the trades and say, what do I need to have done before I can get in there? And once I'm done, what can come in after me? So defining that, a good, clearly defined scope of work, 3 to 5 schedules in your activity may require, 5 or 6 trades that can get on a board and really work through that scope, and really detail it out. So that's your first thing. And then prepare what I call the baseline info. That's really, that's pulling the actual, here are the tasks from the schedule that we're actually going to pull plan, because we're actually, once we pull plan it, you'll see in a minute, we take this information from the pull plan, we re-put it back into that baseline info from the CPM and put it back in there. But after you get, here's the scope that we're going to pull. Here is the activities from the schedule that we're going to be utilizing for that. We break it out and we select the team. What team needs to be in that meeting? What trades? Who from those trades are going to be out in the field that know exactly what it's going to take. And then, as Janie mentioned, you really want to get your materials ready. You want to make sure when you go into that room, these people that are coming in from out in the field, they don't, most of the time they are much more comfortable out in the field building things. They really don't like to be in meetings. So the better preparation you have when you bring them in, better planning you have, is going to be an essential part of that. And then set timing, right? I think we saw that on some of the notes before, but you want to have, you want to try to set it up. What you'll find when you get in here and you have people interacting and they're talking about this, that, and the other, you can chase a lot of rabbits and you can waste a lot of time in those meetings. So you really want to kind of say, we're going to spend, 15 minutes on this. We're going to spend 20 minutes on this, kind of I like to set a schedule for those meetings so that, if they start chasing rabbits or if we start getting distracted, I can really drill down and say, hey, we got to get back on. Let's get back into what we're talking about and meet a schedule for that meeting. Because you do want to call them back, and they know that if I call a meeting, I'm going to call, I'm going to bring them in, and they're going to give me an hour of their time. I want them to know that, hey, I'm just going to take an hour. So I've got to really plan that session out, and then conduct the session, make sure I'm following those time constraints. And then I take that information. I'll take that information. Sometimes it's, I mentioned the form rebar and pour slab, which has my electric, plumbing, and everything in there. So we plan that one session. I may just go back and, change that 5-day duration on one activity to 7 or whatever. Or I may be taking that information and updating 10 different activities in my schedule. But I want to bring that information back into my schedule, adjusting logic and durations or anything like that, and have a good detail. I like to document it, right? After I have the session, I like to take pictures of it just so I have good documentation, and then rework that original schedule and then update the CPM as the work is completed. So I want to go back in and have my schedule detailed enough to where I can go in and see, that how we're doing and if we're actually going to make it. But what are some of the issues that you guys may have had on integrating with the CPM scheduling?
I think personally, one of the issues that I came across in that data center, one was not enough kind of interaction between different trades. We originally thought it would work by kind of all the trades just putting their scope of work up, but didn't necessarily take into account area availability in those specific, with all those trades working simultaneously. So when we kind of originally went through it, it seemed to have worked, but then it shortly became an issue, and we noticed with benefit from the sticky notes that maybe not all the trades could be working in the same area. So that was kind of one thing that I noticed popped up in our full plan meeting.
Yeah.
So that's another one of those benefits of those sticky notes for sure.
And integrating it with the CPM, if you're doing sticky notes, it's super helpful to have someone in the room that's doing it into your P6 and
Absolutely.
at the same time.
Yeah.
If that's not happening, it could be a week or two before they get to the results, and that's not
Right.
helpful.
Yeah, I would add to that. That's a good point. In fact, it helps. I think it helps if your scheduler has been trained a little bit, right, on the process of pool planning. I mean, it's obviously you can do it with just some exposure, but actually having the scheduler run it. So here's what I think, and we had that in the previous slide, is I always encourage instead of just doing a pull planning session and then trying to interpret that and incorporate it into the schedule, I like to start with the schedule and select the activities. Here are the 5 activities from the schedule. Here are, for example, here is a floor sequence for rough ends that we're going to do. We're going to take these 5 typical floor sequence for, overheads and in wall or whatever. And here are the 5 activities that we're going to pull plan. Or, here is this startup and commissioning. Here are the 5 activities we have from the schedule. Let's take those and we start with that so that, and then as the scheduler, if I've got those activities in my mind, I know what we're trying to plan out. I go through that process and I help the team work through the detail. And then it makes it much easier to get that back into the schedule. If you're just starting from scratch and you're doing a pull planning session and you didn't start with the schedule, in other words, what from the schedule am I planning out? What am I detailing? Then it's much more difficult to get that back into the schedule. I can't emphasize that enough. Really starting with, the activities from the pull planning session and getting them back into is really going to help you get that information back into the schedule. So, but one of the questions we have is how do we keep track of changes or deviations? Kind of goes along with that. If I take a 3 or 4 activities from my schedule, we're pull planning it, we're really bringing in the detail. That's going to really help me by taking the details that I get out of that pull planning session and I import it back by adjusting my days, my durations in my activities based on what came out of the pull planning session. I may adjust my logic. I may have had a finish to start, but now I realize that, hey, as long as I get this far in the process, my electrician can start. So I may change that to a start to start or finish to finish, whatever. And I get my logic and my durations and my scope of my schedule, or I may need to add another activity in my schedule, right? So once I get that corrected schedule and that really well detailed plan, I get my schedule activities, my durations corrected, my logic corrected, and all my scope in there, then it's going to make it much easier. If something happens during those activities, some kind of delay occurs, it's going to make it much easier to track your delays. And so that's a really good one.
Another thing is to make sure that your contract, well, if your contract doesn't support full planning, you can still work it out with executive management, but they need to really be on board with the fact that the schedule will indeed change, and that this full plan is just a piece of the process to making an accurate schedule. If we end up at the end of this session and there is an impact to a milestone and everyone agrees that is what the impact is, one, you're kind of doing a collaborative TIA at the same time. But the executive management needs to understand that it will change and that and it's just a piece of the process on integrating it into the schedule, and the schedule is going to look different from here on out. If there's a impact, then automatically feeds into a time impact analysis that you could have ready and produced within the next week, because we've already had a planning session deciding what happened and where we're going from here. So to integrate it into the schedule, sometimes it's a big contract issue if the owner doesn't understand. And if you are a part of the owner team, getting yourself educated on this and be able to sit down and explain to them the pros and the cons and the benefits and alternatives, it's quite helpful.
Yeah, some of the best pull planning sessions that I've actually been a part of, I've done it where you've taken the sticky notes, taken the photos, brought the information back and made the changes on the back end. Like you said, it could take a week to 2 weeks. But if you're doing it, integrating it into the schedule as you're doing the pull planning, everybody gets their sticky notes on the board, you take all that information, and then the scheduler's actually sitting in the room, making those changes in the schedule so you can see how it impacts the schedule. And for there, it gives you a better insight on, is it going to push this milestone? Do we need to, like John was saying, do some start to starts in there, or these finish to finish, seeing how it's going to actually impact it. And are we drawing the schedule back? And is this realistic? Is there trade stacking? So if you're doing that live, I think is the best and most effective way to do a pool plan session.
And you can do immediate mitigation. This happened more than once with Amanda and I, and she's sitting there um, putting it all into the schedule, and her eyes get big, and okay, what does it say? And she says the date, and everyone goes, ah, and then you have that just leads into a whole mitigation process where you can immediately mitigate and figure out, are there any workarounds? Can we mitigate it at all? And are there any pinch points that we can get more or less out of this? So digital is so helpful and beneficial if you're able to do that.
Yeah,
I
what are
think
some of the,
digital and visual hand in hand works great.
Correct.
that kind of leads us into our next, I mean, have any of you used any of the digital tools for like touch plan or any of those for the pool planning?
I have, but I'm from the field, okay? The construction guys and gals, they like to feel that sticky note. They like to be able to put it there. They like to rearrange it and engineer it themselves, and they don't quite get all that when it's a computer. I have more success if it's something they can touch in front of them while there's a scheduler putting it in digitally.
Right.
But B Planner, I mean, a lot of people use them. I just there's so many superintendents that think different ways and not, and then they feel like the software is trying to think for them, and they just I just found better success to do it both physically and digitally at the same time.
Yeah, I know Microsoft has a tool where you can actually you can select your activities and it basically pulls them into a digital whiteboard, basically like the image that you're seeing on the screen. And you just drag and drop sticky notes around. That's pretty cool. I haven't used it a lot. Like I think a lot of people, like you said, Janie, like to use those sticky notes, and I just feel comfortable with that.
And you see it so many times where someone puts up their sticky notes and rearranges somebody else's work. And that's it might
Don't
feel
touch
a
anyone
little
else's sticky
friction,
note.
but immediately they're both up, saying, what are we going to do and how are we going to do this? So I kind of like the physical aspect.
Yeah, brings them in more collaboratively.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to see more and more digital options out there. I've heard touch plan's really good. Lycosoft's tool, I really enjoyed using it, but it's like you said, there's some adaptation that's going to
And
take
as the
some time.
workflow force from the younger ones get to be our age, they're going to bring all that with them, and all of this is going to fade away because they'll be like, what the heck?
Yeah.
AJ, you're our future.
Right.
All right. Let's take just a few more minutes to see if we had a question or dates coming out of these meetings. Definitely. I mean, these dates, every one of those cards have a date assigned to them. You can see those on that board. And so, that's really what you're trying to do is you're taking that milestone. That milestone could just be, getting a concrete slab poured, right? That's your milestone. And so as you work your way back through those, you're definitely addressing dates as you go.
Keith has a question, which I deal a lot in risk management, more so I'm in dispute resolution and mediator for construction in my old age. But so he has a project as a project risk analyst. It would be interesting to hear how pool planning helps resolve uncertainty in the out periods that are not scheduled yet, planning packages. And I have worked with teams a lot. There's always, when I first sit with them, there's a reluctance. They say, we can't plan this. We don't have the CB yet. We can't do this. We don't have the CB yet. And I'm usually hearing that from someone who's close to my age or older and is like, you've done construction for a long time. You kind of know what that CB is going to be. Let's map out the process. So it's quite useful because you're able to show everyone that they know more than they think they know. It's all in here, but because we don't have the CB, we just tell ourselves we don't know and we can't plan it when in fact they can. And actually, it's beneficial. And Amanda and I have done this too, where we have actually put that package together, and that gives the design team kind of a deadline to work to, right? It's like because we find our drop dead dates and we're like, we need the design by this date, and then they have to do a pull session to figure out how they're going to get the design to us by that date. But all the steps in a process from RFI all the way to change order, um, I'm I map those out with teams often, and so that we can find out what those dates are, when in fact is that going to push the schedule. And so it's quite helpful in risk analysis.
Right.
Well, good. Well,
Here's another one. It says, do you add start and finish task and pool planning or just showing the finish date? AJ, you can actually lend to this one as well. Sometimes you can do pool plans to milestones or specific dates in there, whether it's a phase 1 completion or a specific turnover of a building. You were talking about that this morning on a meeting, AJ, on your data center. You guys are pool planning the first phase, but it's actually compressing the back end of the schedule. So how are you guys going about that?
Yeah, exactly. So our main focus right now is just phase 1 and phase 2, because those are basically, it's getting delayed by deliverables. So what we've been doing is kind of finding ways to pull plan to that phase 1 completion. And ultimately it's creating a little bit of compression on the back end. So it's something that needs to be discussed with trades. So we haven't gotten to that point yet where that's gonna kind of get figured out. But it has been brought to everyone's attention that this does need to be discussed because of that compression. So,
well, thanks everybody for attending. And thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Janie, for joining us. You'll have to do this more often. AJ, good to have you. It's good to have somebody young on here instead of us.
It sure is.
Good.
thanks for
Yeah,
having me,
appreciate you
guys.
joining us. Yeah, appreciate your input. And just want to remind everybody, I mean, that we're actually going to have a track at the conference. We were talking the other day with some of our faculty, track that'll be dealing with different types of scheduling, from pool planning, like we talked a little bit today. It'll be some hands-on training, and even the TACT planning. We had a session here a month or so ago on TACT planning. We'll be having some good training on that. So hopefully you'll join us at the conference, and we thank everyone again for attending, and we hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.